live from the math department. How to graphing an equation on the TI-84 calculator. Today I'll show you how to graph any equation on the calculator, how to adjust certain graph features to improve your graph, and also some common errors and mistakes that can occur. Let's start by graphing the linear equation y equals 3x plus 2. The first thing that we'll do is press our y equals button and clear out any equations that already exist. Now let's type y equals 3x plus 2 by using the x key next to alpha plus 2. You can ignore the other variables on this button up here, as they'll only occur if you're changing the mode from functions to parametric equations, polar equations, or sequences. We're not doing any of that, so our variable will stay as x. Before hitting graph, I like to standardize my viewing window so that my x-axis will stretch from -10 to +10, and my y-axis will do the same. The easiest way to do this is by pressing zoom and selecting 6 Z standard. And there we see the line with its slope of 3 and y-intercept of 2. Now, one problem with this viewing window is that it's distorted, because we have a length of 20 units both horizontally and vertically, even though the screen is obviously wider than it is tall. In fact, the screen is approximately a 3:2 ratio, so we can square up our viewing here by selecting Window and entering values that reflect that ratio. For the x minimum, -9. For the x maximum, 9. And for the y minimum, -6. And the y maximum, 6. X-SCL and Y-SCL simply refer to the scale on the axes. Do you want to tick every unit, every 5 units? It's mostly irrelevant unless you have an extremely large or extremely small viewing range. So we can go ahead and graph this. The other way to square the window up quickly is by again going into the zoom settings and selecting number 5, Z square, which will automatically do it for you. There are 2 ways to see specific points on the equation that you've graphed. One way is to view the table of values by pressing second graph. In the table here, you can scroll up and down to see new values for both x and y. If you want to jump to a specific value, the quickest way is by going to Table Set by pressing second window. In this menu, you can see that you can select your table start value and delta table, meaning how much is the x value increasing by. Well, let's jump to the point where x is 20, and let's make the change in table values be 3. Of course, you can always go back and reset these table settings later. The other way to see specific points on the graph is by pressing Trace and seeing the cursor on the line at a specific set of coordinates. Here we are at the point 0, 2. You can move the cursor now by pressing the left or right arrows and seeing the corresponding coordinates written below. But notice that as soon as we moved the cursor away from the y-axis, the coordinates all became rather unwieldy numbers. One thing that you can do is simply type in the x value that you want and press enter. What are the coordinates when x equals -2? Let's find out. -2, enter. And it takes us to the point -2, -4. Another way to correct these coordinate values is again in the zoom window, this time selecting 4 Z decimal. And we can see nice coordinate values for each point that the cursor is moving to. Now let's say for some reason we needed to add a second equation into our graph. Well, we go back and select y equals and enter the next equation on the y2 line. Let's use a quadratic equation this time. Y equals x squared minus 5x minus 8. When I press graph, the resulting graph doesn't show me much of the expected parabola. I know it's supposed to have a curved shape, something like a rope hanging loosely between 2 fixed endpoints, but I can't see that here. I could fix this manually by entering new values in the window settings, or I can have the calculator assist me with this by selecting zoom and scrolling all the way down to zoom fit. This command tells your calculator not to adjust the X settings for the window, but to select the best possible Y settings for the X values that you already have. Now the resulting graph here is better, but we still can't see on the right-hand side where the graph crosses the X-axis. So we do need to edit it manually by pressing Window. At this point, I usually like to change these values to whole numbers anyways, changing the X minimum to -5, and the X maximum, which clearly wasn't going far enough before, I'll take a guess of 10. Hopefully I can see the whole thing now. And then let's scroll down and change the Y minimum settings. Let's change that one to -15 and the maximum to 40. Now here's a case where I might wish to change the Y scale. Since I've got 55 units happening vertically on this small screen, perhaps I want to change my Y scale to a setting of 5 so that it's not crammed in there too tightly. Now when I graph the equation, there's my line, and the parabola shows up nicely as well. I chose good values. But you know what? I've changed my mind about that linear equation. I don't want to see it at the same time as the quadratic. So I'm going to go back into the y equals menu, but I'm not going to delete it. I want to keep it around for use later on. I'm going to press the left arrow so that my cursor is now on top of the equals sign and press Enter. You'll notice that the coloring on the equals sign is inverted, and it means that this equation is no longer selected for graphing. When I press Graph now, all I see is the highlighted equation, the quadratic equation. To turn that equation back on for graphing, I just repeat the process, and to turn other equations on and off, I also repeat the process. Now sometimes when a student goes to graph an equation, they get this error message. Your calculator is not calling you a name. It's telling you that something is wrong with the dimensions of the graph. We have no choice here but to select Quit. But since it's something to do with the graph, the equation, I want to see where the error is. Press Y equals. Well, both of my equations seem to be reasonable, but what's this up in the top right? Why is plot 3 highlighted? You've inadvertently told your calculator that you have a scatter plot of data stored in the spreadsheets that you would like it to graph. And when your calculator is going to look for the data, it can't find any. So it tells you that the dimensions of the spreadsheet are invalid. Simply scroll up to the top, scroll to the appropriate plot setting, press Enter, unselect that scatter plot, and now your graph will go as it should. Another common error that shows up is this one. Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. There's a problem with your window settings. Select Quit and press Window. Oh, there's the problem. Some genius told the calculator that the minimum X value was 10, while the maximum X value was -5. Those are in the wrong order. Let's fix that up. -5 and 10. There. And now our graph is working again. Well, that's all for today's hot tips on how to graph equations. Until next time, keep your calculator batteries charged, and I'll see you in class. Hi, thank you for calling AT&T.